You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible.
Last week, 3 people were killed and at least 8 people were shot in Baltimore City, 7 of them within about 5 hours during the day. Baltimore is now statistically one of the most dangerous cities in the United States and, unfortunately, the most dangerous city in Maryland. The city's violent crime rate is more than double the rate of the next closest city. Homicide is a particularly glaring problem in Baltimore, but those aren't the only problems. Is a change in leadership the answer? Joining me now to discuss this along with our panel is Pastor Shannon Wright, who is running for mayor in Baltimore. Pastor Wright, thank you so much for joining us here on Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Thank you for having me here today.
A lot of people have talked about a need for change, but one thing remains consistent in Baltimore: the violence continues. Whether we're talking about former Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake, then Mayor Catherine Pugh, and now Mayor Bernard C. Jack Young, the violence has continued, and unfortunately the violent homicides have continued. Baltimore, for what I believe now is at least the 4th, perhaps 5th year in a row, has exceeded 300 homicides. As a person running for mayor, what is your solution or suggestion to curb the violence facing the city?
Well, as you stated, this is the 5th year of a 300+ homicide rate. There are so many issues going on in the city. One of the things in doing some research before deciding to run, because I didn't decide to run from a resume or my ego or anything like that, because contrary to what folks may think, running for office is not exactly for the faint of heart. Let's be real about that. So it seems to me one of the problems that we have is, and I may get in trouble for bringing this up, Baltimore City is one of the largest cities without an accredited police department. We're one of the only cities in the country that has so many sub-police departments that are actually separate entities. And a lot of folks say that's because folks in those areas had concerns and they actually formed their own police departments. Now, all of those that are around Baltimore are accredited. So it seems to me when you have a period of years where you have a higher turnover rate in police commissioners than some folks see in a lifetime in a city, there are some issues and problems that didn't happen overnight. New leadership is one thing that is needed, but we also need to clean house. So if you just change your leadership thoughts in terms of the mayor you elect, but keep all the other stuff, it's kind of like when you're expecting company and you open the closet and you push everything in the closet and put on a new dress and go greet your guests. All your dirt and garbage is still up in your house. We need to clean house. So when we look at what should we do in terms of the homicide rate, there's a couple of things. We need elected leaders that are actually tough on crime.
What does being tough on crime mean?
What that means is if you are raising children, you understand that you love that child, but you let them know what they're doing is unacceptable. So we need leadership that is willing to take that stance and then take the next step to look at what is the root cause of the crime. Is it the fact that so many corporations have left, so a lot of jobs have left? Is it the fact that our schools aren't educating the kids that are coming out, that do graduate, to be able to get jobs in the trending markets that are in this country? What are some of the root causes? Is it the way that the welfare system is kind of broken up the family, and we have a lot more single head of household families than 2 parents in a household? So I think we have to be tough on crime and do something about that and also address the root causes. And no one seems to want to do that because that's not sexy.
Pastor Wright, I'd have to push back a little bit on that. The question of not being tough on crime seems to be historically inaccurate, as there's been a litany of mandatory minimum laws passed in the city of Baltimore at least since 1999 up until 2011 when Mayor Sheila Dixon was taking over for some point. And we found that those particular laws, one, either violated the civil rights of many Baltimoreans there, and 2, we found that as passed in the state judiciary with now a retiring Senate chair of the Judiciary Committee, Bobby Zirkin, all the mandatory minimum laws did not have a positive impact on violence in most of our cities. In fact, they had adverse impacts. Lastly, and to get back to your question about examining the root causes, there have been a number of studies that have examined a lot of the root causes, particularly done by Dr. Lawrence Brown of Morgan State University, that demonstrates and documents the investment in the black butterfly, the lack of investment, pardon me, in the black butterfly, but the investment in the white L. So if I'm just coming back to you for a second, there are folks who are condemning the violence. It's not as though there's not an active, ongoing effort. There are the 300 men who do marches. There's a religious community of the Nation of Islam and Christian Unified Brothers who come together every Monday for marches throughout the neighborhood, and yet the violence persists. If we have all of that information in front of us, are there new options that seem to be there for us?
Clearly, what has been done is not working. So I hear what you're saying, and you're looking at the statistics, but I live in the city, and I see it. There was a town hall last night. And some of my...
Where in the city was that town hall?
That was at one of the schools, one of the elementary schools.
Do we remember which one?
In the Southwest, Archbishop. It was a private Catholic school, elementary school. But they've been...
And who posted that town hall?
Fox 45.
To be fair, Sinclair has been relatively conservative on a number of issues that are antagonistic against Baltimore City, and they've recently hired as an anchor a woman who was fired from another major media outlet for making potentially what some would lazily call racially charged and gender biased, but nonetheless asking if black women weren't sufficient to be leaders of Baltimore City. So I think our viewers need to know that context in understanding what what type of town hall you're discussing. Please feel free to go on.
Well, then you would also want to add the context that they're the only outlet looking to give voice to policy changes that might actually change the outcome and the trajectory of our city.
What about the town hall that was happening at Pleasant Hope Baptist Church held by leaders of a beautiful struggle? They are looking for policy suggestions that hope to change the outcomes of the city.
I hear you on that. Nonetheless, 5th year in a row, homicides over 300. There's a lot of talk, and granted, but until that talk comes together, the one thing that I'm hearing consistently from folks in the city that come out to these different town halls is that they are looking for a different kind of leadership that seems to actually put people over business and over the big donors and over the big checks and the big corporations. So we can talk philosophically all we want to, but it's the people living in the city that don't have the ability to write those big checks that are getting overlooked. So when I look at things like Fox 45, they have had a very slanted view because all of the folks that you've seen have all been from one particular political persuasion.
What persuasion is the leaders of the beautiful struggle?
As I was saying, with Fox 45, which is the only major news outlet, because I'm really trying to talk about the media specifically at this moment.
What persuasion is Maryland Matters? They lean more so conservative, many would argue.
I don't know that I would agree with that. I don't know that I would agree with that at all.
Julian, go right ahead.
And give me a pass. I'm not from, I'm from Mississippi, so when, when
Jackson has his own.
Well, yeah. Oh, we got love for Hines County down here. Chokwe Lumumba is well known.
My question is this, and you can answer this as well. When you talk about 300 murders every year, how much has there been a study to show what articulates that? Is it lack of jobs? Is it lack of fathers in the household? Is it lack of after-school care programs? What attributes that? Because I don't know.
So pause for a second. So I'm a native Chicagoan. At the end of the day, what we know across multiple urban cities is the exact same things are contributing factors to violence. So we can say that it is lack of jobs because we see that there's economic instability in a lot of these communities. In addition to that, you have fathers who have been removed from the household due to a lot of the marijuana legislation, due to a lot of the 3 strikes legislation. But we also have some grander issues. We have schools that are crumbling and falling apart. We have communities that have reached divestment levels that have never before been seen in this country. Baltimore is one of the recipients of that. When we're looking at these levels of violence, we know what the solutions are. We know what it means to invest in these communities. We know what it is to invest in these schools. We know what it is to treat these communities like we do the suburbs that surround them. As somebody who works with Sinclair, because full disclosure, they are my employer. At the end of the day, when I look at this, I see the same thing in Baltimore that I see in my hometown, the south side of Chicago. At the end of the day, you have kids who don't have after-school programs to go to. You have schools that have been failing students for the longest. You have communities where the person who a lot of these young people sadly look up to is the street hustler on the corner because you don't see somebody who is suited and booted going to work every day. At the end of the day, you see a lot of community divestment because corporations have decided to go to the suburbs. And in Baltimore, that suburb is 5-10 minutes away, but you would rather invest there than you would in Baltimore. And we know what happens when that occurs. It is not that these people are any less deserving. It is not that they are any worse off. It is that we have seen city organizations, we have seen community leaders, we have seen people divest interest in these areas over time, and now we see the media by and large, because they like to report on when there's murders, when there's death, when there's pestilence in any community across the country, especially when that community is Black or Latino, we're seeing that become the main story. What we need to get back to is the harsh effects of what is happening in these communities. And I'm not going to blame it on all single parent households, because to be honest, there are a lot of white single parent households as well. So when we talk about that, we also have to look at the fact that single parent households as of 2019 are growing no matter what community you're from.
Didn't
I grew up in a single parent household.
So
did I.
what issue?
Hold on, Julian, excuse me for jumping in. Jumping in 1 second. Pastor Wright, specifically a question, because you offered something that I think is valuable that our viewers and listeners can hear, and I'd be curious your thoughts. So recently, there was a $660 million TIF allocated to Kevin Plank's corporation that is developing Port Covington. Now, to your point about needing new leadership that doesn't prioritize business first, had you been mayor, would you have issued that TIF?
No.
Would you? Are you open to and interested in, and would you pressure the city council, should you become mayor, to reopen the pilot program that Johns Hopkins University has, where they're paying payments in lieu of taxes?
So I think that in Baltimore City specifically, we have to look at all of the things that the city is really willing to give away, with giving away money and resources, that things that could be used for folks in the city. When you look at Port Covington, that TIF is one of the largest for a municipality ever. Just this week, we were talking about the city council arguing about the first bond to be issued, using public funds to give a millionaire to build a multi-million-dollar project that most of the folks in the city will not be able to afford to go to or benefit from in any way. I truly believe that with the amount of homeless folks we've got in the city, with the amount of folks that are underemployed in the city, there are some better allocations of those resources. And I think instead of giving away the tax base and the business to folks that could do things in other ways, we need to support those that are in the city that
What
are
does
struggling.
support look like specifically? Because in Baltimore, the mayor has an unprecedented amount of control over the budget. So when you use phrasing like "we need to support," that's fair. Many will be curious.
So
what does that mean specifically?
That support means, instead of giving away a TIF to a developer for a project that most folks won't be able to live in, how about we take some of the resources that are already in the community and breathe some life into some of the abandoned properties we've got in the city? How about use
So is that
some
similar
of
to the vacant to value program?
Very similar.
Okay.
Very similar. Let's use some of those Section 3 regulations that are already on the books and get folks trained up to be able to rehab those houses and get families in those houses, instead of keeping them abandoned, tearing them down, putting out bids for the folks that live in the city can't afford to live in.
I agree with you there. I would also say that we probably need to rewind a little bit, because everybody doesn't know what TIF is.
I was just going to say TIFs are tax increment financing.
Tax increment financing.
Thank you, Amisha. Appreciate that.
It's supposed to be used to revitalize blighted communities.
And
that is the purpose of them in every mayoral budget. However, in the majority of urban communities across this country, that is not what they are used for. They are used to bolster the economy for those who are already middle class and upper middle class. So those blighted communities never see those dollars.
So for example, with Port Covington, the TIF that was out there, the number that you quoted is just the first part. That's not the whole picture, okay? So when you look at that, the one major stipulation that they had, if you want to consider it major, is they had to throw a few dollars to some of the housing communities in the area that are, shall we say, economically challenged, so that they would reap some kind of a benefit. That's nothing in comparison. The thing that a lot of these communities are talking about, initially they wanted a community center that won't even be in Port Covington community. So when our folks look at these TIFs and they look at this money that's being spent and think, well, you know, they got to set aside for us, that means that they are setting the table and they are setting you aside some crumbs to keep you happy. Our folks deserve more than that. The resources in the city need to be used in the city to benefit the folks that live in the city. And that, traditionally, has not happened for a long time in Baltimore and many of our urban centers.
And Pastor Wright, how do you think that you would go about getting the support, as we just had in our previous segment, to fund your candidacy and get your message out if you're going to tell developers who in local elections tend to have the deep pocketbooks that you are actually going to be introducing policy that is against many of their interests, both personally and financially?
See, how truthful should I be? Okay, I'm gonna keep it real. I'm a Republican running in Baltimore. How many developers do you think are writing me checks?
They should if they know what the policy is, but your policy doesn't sound much Republican at all.
No, it's people first. That's my policy. People first.
Wait. So this is what I'm gathering. You have undeveloped communities. You're talking about giving them jobs, teaching them trades to where they can rebuild these houses in the community, correct? Just to give them jobs. You're talking about upgrading the community, bringing it back to just keeping it away from what it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You're trying to bring it back up. My question is this. If you have individuals, you're giving them jobs in the community. They're building these houses in the community. What price are you going to set on those houses that people from the community are building? But at the same time, those individuals who are working in these houses, revitalizing and rehabbing them, can't even afford them. So at what point do we talk about
Julie,
jobs?
your question poses some things that are incompatible to start with, and I don't have enough time to go into the math of how the question is flawed. So I do want to just backtrack just for a little. And Hannah, we haven't brought you into the conversation yet.
I want to jump in here because I think we're talking a lot about the economics, and economics are important for helping us solve violence, but it actually isn't everything. What we're not talking about right now is the actual root cause of violence, which is trauma. And we know that it's trauma. We know that we have statistics that we can look at and predict who is more likely to become violent, and we have programs where we can start intervening before violence occurs. I want to know how come we're not funding those programs. We have things like Ceasefire Baltimore. We have things like Cure Violence that are doing some amazing innovative work in our communities. They're working with community partners. They're breaking down barriers where a lot of communities have had terrible relationships with police for many, many decades and therefore don't have great working relationships. And they're getting past those barriers and they're actually seeing amazing results. But what we are seeing in cities like Baltimore is that those programs aren't funded adequately. So I want to know where we're going to move actual money from and to these programs. I think that's what we need to be talking about.
As soon as if we can go back into our last segment and figure out how you tell the people who fund your elections no, we'll be able to tell those folks, thank you for giving me the money to get this seat. Now I'm going to invest it in the community.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. All right, folks, as the marijuana momentum continues, our folks at marijuanastock.org have already reached more than half of their funding goal for the hemp CBD investment. So if you want to take advantage, you better get in now. Of course, hemp is a cousin to marijuana with a much higher concentration of CBD, which means hemp gives you all the medical benefits of marijuana, but it won't get you high. Scott is sad. Now, folks, if you don't know, hemp farming is now legal in the U.S., creating one of the largest commodities worldwide. It's an investment opportunity for you and the folks at 420 Real Estate have a simple business model. They buy land that supports hemp CBD grow operations and lease it to licensed high-paying tenants, people like Chris. They are hemp CBD landlords, and you can get in on the action. Now, all you got to do is invest as little as $200. Monique, you got that. In their crowdfunding campaign, up to $10,000. Amisha, some of that Sinclair money. To invest, go to marijuanastock.org. That's marijuanastock.org. Get in the game and get in the game now. Now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video.